These are major developments today. We have never seen a former president face this type of legal uncertainty. Mr. Trump's former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, now the latest member of the former president's inner circle to fold and cooperate with prosecutors who are charging Mr. Trump with trying to undermine the 2020 election. He was former President Trump's last chief of staff and one of his most ardent supporters. But tonight, Mark Meadows has been granted immunity in exchange for grand jury testimony against Mr. Trump in the 2020 federal election interference case. ABC News, first to report Meadows, has testified before a grand jury at least 3 times. Meadows reportedly told the grand jury that he informed Mr. Trump his claims of widespread election fraud were, quote, baseless, and that he was being, quote, dishonest with voters when he declared victory on election night. According to ABC, Meadows also told Mr. Trump that his former attorney Rudy Giuliani had failed to find any evidence of election fraud. All this after the Supreme Court denied the former president's election challenge.
All right, people, welcome back to Dr. John Podcast. A true insider, not a junior aide, but someone who sat in the rooms where real decisions were made and unfiltered conversations happened, has flipped. And for the first time, the man who built his empire on loyalty and fear is watching both crumble simultaneously. The shockwave that's ripping through the political world right now isn't just about one person changing sides. It's about what this defection represents. It's the canary in the coal mine, the first crack in a dam that's been holding back an ocean of legal and political pressure.
We are following the latest developments and the multiple legal challenges facing former President Donald Trump. CBS News has learned that former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows is extensively cooperating with federal prosecutors investigating efforts to overturn the 2020 presidential election, and his cooperation has Trump allies on edge. It comes amid a movement in the election interference case in Georgia and Trump's civil fraud case in New York. Robert Costa was in the courtroom with Donald Trump yesterday.
Mark Meadows was by former President Donald Trump's side throughout the aftermath of the 2020 election. Now, sources close to Trump tell CBS News the former chief of staff is cooperating with special counsel Jack Smith in his election interference case. Meadows' lawyers declined to comment about the investigation. But one person close to a key witness says Meadows has provided detailed testimony about his private discussions with Trump. And there is concern he could be moving toward an immunity arrangement with prosecutors.
Imagine the sheer panic that sets in when someone who knows everything, every whispered confession, every strategic maneuver that skirted the edge of legality, every private outburst, decides that their future is worth more than their silence. This insider didn't just wake up one morning and decide to be a hero. The flip happened under pressure so intense that it warped the calculus of self-preservation. We're talking about the kind of pressure that makes sleep impossible, that turns every conversation into a potential trap, that makes you look at your family across the dinner table and realize you're risking everything for a person who wouldn't cross the street to help you. The exact contours of this pressure are still coming into focus, but the sources are unmistakable. Legal pressure is the obvious beast in the room.
New development in the classified documents case against former President Trump. Sources tell ABC News that former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows apparently contradicted Trump's primary public defense that he declassified broad sets of documents. Here's ABC senior White House correspondent Selena Wang.
Tonight, sources familiar with the matter tell ABC News that former Trump White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows told federal investigators he could not recall Donald Trump ever ordering the broad declassification of materials. The FBI seized more than 100 classified documents from the former president's Mar-a-Lago estate last August.
Everything was declassified because I had the right to declassify.
And in a July 2021 audio recording obtained by ABC News, Trump allegedly describes a classified document he held onto.
This is secret information. Look at this. This was done by the military, given to me.
Federal prosecutors, state attorneys general, and investigative bodies have been circling like wolves for years, and they've perfected the art of flipping witnesses. They come bearing both gifts and threats: reduced sentences, immunity deals, the chance to avoid the orange jumpsuit, contrasted with the horrifying prospect of being left holding the bag while the boss escapes on a private jet to a non-extradition fantasy. Then there's the political pressure, a different kind of force field that's been intensifying as the power dynamics shift. GOP rivals, establishment figures who've been waiting for their moment, and strategists who see the writing on the wall are all whispering the same thing. Distance yourself before you become radioactive, jump before the ship sinks and takes your entire career to the ocean floor.
Breaking news in the special counsel's election case against former President Donald Trump. Sources telling ABC News that the former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, has been granted immunity in that case in exchange for testifying before the grand jury. So bringing us this story is ABC News chief Washington correspondent and co-anchor of This Week, Jonathan Karl. Thank you so much for being with us, John. So first of all, what more are you learning from your sources at this hour?
This is a major development, Kana. The world had been watching this case for what Mark Meadows would do. Mark Meadows was Donald Trump's chief of staff. He was at his side throughout that entire post-election period where Trump was trying to overturn the presidential election, one of his most loyal and important aides. And what we're learning is that he has told federal prosecutors that the election was not stolen in his view. In fact, he said to those prosecutors, we are told, according to our sources, that he agreed with the assessment that the 2020 election was the most secure election in American history.
Personal pressure plays its part too. A relentless drumbeat from spouses who didn't sign up to be married to a potential inmate, friends who look at you with a mixture of pity and horror, children who deserve a father not consumed by a legal bonfire. Whatever cocktail of pressures finally broke this person's resolve, the result is a seismic event. The insider is now cooperating with investigators, or has publicly shattered the illusion of unity, or quite possibly both. And the reaction from the man at the center of this implosion? Absolute volcanic fury. Reports filtering out from behind the barricades paint a picture of a leader raging against the dying of the loyalty light. Phone calls are being made at all hours, a desperate, furious campaign to smoke out disloyalty, to demand to know who else might be wavering, who else is talking to the feds, who else is secretly recording conversations. This is the nightmare scenario, the one that keeps a certain type of authoritarian awake at 3 a.m., because once one person steps off the reservation and into the prosecutor's conference room, the entire architecture of silence begins to rot. Every other insider starts doing a frantic cost-benefit analysis, a cold-eyed calculation of whether staying loyal means riding a burning plane into the mountain, or whether flipping offers a parachute. This is the domino theory applied to personal loyalty. The first domino has toppled, and the sound it made as it hit the ground was deafening. Now every other domino is quivering. People who once considered their allegiance unshakable are suddenly asking terrifying questions. What if the first cooperator gets the best deal? What if they're already handing over documents, recordings, testimony that implicates me? What if I wait too long and when I finally decide to talk, the prosecutors don't need me anymore because someone else already gave them everything? That's the game. It's a race to the prosecutor's door, a stampede of self-preservation where the first ones through get the golden tickets and the stragglers get the full weight of the law. The nightmare of a cascading inner circle collapse is no longer a distant theoretical possibility. It's the movie playing on every screen in Trump world, and nobody knows how to turn it off. The timing of this betrayal adds an almost operatic layer of tragedy or dark comedy, depending on your perspective. This isn't happening during a quiet period where there's time to spin, time to strategize, time to find a new fixer who can patch the leaks. This is happening in the middle of a multifront apocalypse. The entire operation is beset on all sides by crises that would each individually be considered career-ending for a normal political figure. There's the swirling, toxic controversy surrounding certain sealed files that have a mysterious gravitational pull, files that segments of his own base are demanding to see, creating a rift between the leader and the followers who once marched in lockstep. There's a full-blown corruption scandal that consumed the Department of Justice, forcing out a key loyalist in disgrace and leaving behind a stench of impropriety that no amount of air freshener can mask. There's the grinding machinery of government dysfunction, shutdown dramas, and open warfare with Senate Republicans who are supposed to be on the same team, but increasingly act like hostages suffering from Stockholm Syndrome. And hanging over all of it like a guillotine blade is the criminal conviction and the slow, agonizing march toward sentencing, a date with destiny that no amount of legal maneuvering has been able to erase. With all of this chaos swirling like a Category 5 hurricane, the defection of a top insider is the ingredient that turns disaster into utter annihilation. It's the moment when the orchestra on the deck of the Titanic stops playing cheerful music and starts screaming. If the inner circle, the sanctum sanctorum, the people who know the darkest truths, can no longer be trusted to stay silent, then the entire defense strategy, both legal and political, starts to disintegrate. What information is this person carrying? What secrets are now being spilled in hushed tones on secure lines to investigators? What documents have been copied? What private conversations, the kind where guard was completely dropped and the truth came spilling out, are now evidence? That's the terror that's gripping the command center. Not just that one person left, but that the person who left is now a living, breathing, walking repository of indictable offenses. The public dimension of betrayal is also metastasizing in a way that compounds the private agony. The relationship with the vice president, once a marriage of political convenience that was supposed to project strength and unity, has fractured into open humiliation. The vice president, the number two, the person who would step into the breach if the worst happened, was publicly snubbed in a manner so brutal and so casual that even hardened political observers flinched. This wasn't a subtle policy disagreement or a behind-the-scenes power struggle. This was an on-air, in-front-of-the-world knife in the back, a signal to everyone in the orbit that even the second most powerful person in the administration is not safe. If the VP can be treated with such contemptuous disregard, what chance does a mere advisor, a staffer, a cabinet secretary have? The message is received loud and clear. Everyone is a disposable tool, and when the tool no longer serves its purpose, or when the boss just wakes up in a bad mood, the tool gets smashed. This public humiliation of the VP creates an environment of pure psychological terror. Every person in the administration is now looking over their shoulder, not just at prosecutors, but at their own boss. They're wondering when the axe will fall on them. They're wondering if today's private meeting is being framed as tomorrow's public betrayal. They're starting to squirrel away evidence, not necessarily to use offensively, but to defend themselves when they inevitably get thrown under the bus. They're documenting instructions, saving emails, backing up text chains. They're building a fortress of receipts because they know that in this operation, loyalty flows only one way, upward. The boss demands total, unquestioning fealty, but extends none downward. The historical record is a graveyard of loyalists who gave everything and were rewarded with public castigation. The former fixer who went to prison, the former mayor who became a national punchline and is now facing his own legal ruin. The decorated generals who left the administration and were immediately branded as weak, stupid, overrated. The pattern is so consistent, it's practically a law of physics. Proximity to power here eventually results in personal annihilation. People currently inside the circle are watching this history play out in real time, and they're making a rational decision that they don't want to be the next chapter in the cautionary tale. They don't want to be the next person standing alone outside a courthouse, legal bills mounting, reputation destroyed, while the boss tweets that they were never really that important anyway. So when an insider flips, they're not just saving themselves from legal jeopardy, they're jumping off a sinking ship before the captain orders them to go down with it and then steals their lifeboat. The Republican strategists who still have any ability to think independently are muttering the same dark observation. This isn't a political party anymore. It's a personality cult, a movement whose entire identity is fused to the whims, grievances, and fate of a single individual. And a movement built on such fragile architecture is a movement that cannot survive the failure of its leader. When the leader's poll numbers start to erode, even among the faithful, when the scandals pile up so high that even the most dedicated spin doctors can't see over them, the movement starts to wobble. And when it wobbles, the rats start to flee. Social media has become a raging inferno of speculation and glee and schadenfreude and terror, all mixed into a toxic digital stew. Thousands upon thousands of shares, comments, and quote tweets are flying around, all trying to answer the same burning questions. Who is the insider who flipped? Is it someone from the legal team, a political operative, a family member? What do they know? Are they spilling to federal prosecutors in a criminal probe, or are they cooperating with congressional committees committees digging into corruption? Are they the source for a forthcoming tell-all book that's going to detonate like a bomb, or are they going to sit for a primetime interview where they spill everything on camera? The vacuum of confirmed information is being filled by a hurricane of theories, each one more salacious than the last. And in the middle of this information maelstrom, there's a growing, palpable sense that this isn't the end. It's just the beginning, that this first flip is the starting gun for a race to see who can betray second, third, and fourth. The mechanics of this collapse follow a grim, well-established script that has brought down empires from mafia families to corrupt corporations. The process of cascading cooperation works because it preys on the most primal human fears. Person A flips, and suddenly Person B realizes they're holding a leaking bag of incriminating facts. Person B knows that Person A can give up information that will sink Person B unless Person B gets to the prosecutors first and offers an even bigger fish. Person C, watching from the next office over, sees A and B running for the exits and realizes that if they don't move immediately, they'll be the last one standing when the indictments drop, and the last one standing always gets the harshest sentence. This dynamic creates a panic-driven chain reaction where everyone in the organization suddenly sees cooperation not as a betrayal of the boss, but as the only logical move to protect their own family. The boss knows this. The boss has seen this play out in dozens of cases he's watched from afar, and now the boss is staring down the barrel of that same dynamic, and he is absolutely petrified. The factors that pushed this particular insider over the edge are likely a perfect storm of all these fears converging at once. Legal jeopardy is the nuclear option. If you're facing the prospect of spending years, maybe decades, inside a federal prison, watching your children grow up through plexiglass partitions, and your spouse gradually become a stranger, the abstract concept of loyalty evaporates. A prosecutor slides a piece of paper across the table, a proffer agreement, and says, "Tell us everything you know about what really happened, and you might not have to die in a cell." That's a powerful motivator, especially when the alternative is trusting that the boss, who has never sacrificed an ounce of his own comfort for anyone else, will somehow protect you. The boss won't. Everyone knows the boss won't, so you take the deal. Political survival is another massive factor. If you're someone with ambition, someone who wants to run for office someday, or just someone who wants to continue working in the political sphere and not be a permanent pariah, being a branded Trump loyalist is starting to look like a scarlet letter that makes you unemployable. The political winds are shifting. The base that once demanded absolute fealty is starting to fracture on certain key issues, creating an opening for people to distance themselves without being completely exiled. If you can flip, and if you can frame your flip not as cowardice, but as a long-delayed act of conscience, I saw things that troubled me deeply, and I can no longer remain silent narrative, you can potentially salvage a future. You can rebrand from a loyal soldier to a truth teller. It's a cynical calculation, but politics runs on cynicism. Then there's the relentless, grinding pressure of personal life. Imagine the conversations that happen in the quiet moments, away from the rallies and the cameras. A spouse who says, "I didn't marry a criminal. I didn't sign up to raise our kids alone while you serve a sentence. You need to think about us. You need to think about your family. That man doesn't care if you go to prison. He'll have forgotten your name by the time they lock the cell door." Friends who once envied your access now call with concern, asking if you've talked to a lawyer, if you've thought about what happens when the music stops. The isolation of being in the inner circle, once a badge of honor, becomes a suffocating prison. The flip becomes not just a legal strategy or a political maneuver, but an escape hatch, a way to breathe again, a way to reclaim a life that was being systematically destroyed by proximity to chaos. And then, in the rarest of cases, there's the moral breaking point. It's probably the least common trigger because anyone who's survived in this environment for this long has already made peace with ethical compromises that would stagger a normal person. But even the most flexible consciences can snap under enough strain. Maybe it was something specific, a piece of information so horrifying, a revelation so damning, that even a seasoned operative couldn't stomach it. Maybe it was the cumulative weight of corruption, the realization that they were complicit in something genuinely evil. Maybe it was just a quiet moment of clarity where they looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the person staring back. Whatever the catalyst, the result is the same. A decision to stop enabling, to stop covering up, and to start telling the truth, whatever the personal cost. The public humiliation of the vice president deserves a much closer examination because it's the key that unlocks the psychology of the entire collapsing organization. The vice president in a normal administration is a figure of immense respect. Maybe not politically powerful in every model, but treated with dignity, consulted on major decisions, and presented to the world as a capable partner. In this administration, the vice president was publicly snubbed in a manner that suggested not just a lack of respect, but active contempt. This is a man who was chosen, who accepted the role, who has been a loyal defender, and who was treated like a piece of garbage. The vice president couldn't do anything about it. He had to stand there and absorb the humiliation because any pushback would be framed as disloyalty and would likely result in an even more brutal public evisceration. He's trapped in a gilded cage, humiliated but unable to flee without causing a constitutional and political crisis. This dynamic sends shockwaves down through every level of the organization. If the vice president, with all his title and supposed importance, is not safe, then the deputy assistant to some undersecretary is definitely not safe. The level of paranoia this injects into the bloodstream of the administration is fatal. People who should be focused on governing are focused on surviving. They're watching the vice president's humiliation and thinking, I need to get out before I'm the one standing on that stage, blinking back shock while the boss eviscerates my dignity in front of the entire world. And the smarter ones are thinking, when I get out, I need to make sure I have leverage. I need to make sure I have a story to tell that puts me on the side of the angels, because if I just leave quietly, I'll be destroyed anyway. The only way to survive the retaliation is to flip aggressively, to cooperate so publicly and so thoroughly that any counterattack from the boss looks like the desperate flailing of a guilty man. The transformation of the Republican Party into a vehicle for one person's ego is now so complete that the party itself is suffering from a kind of autoimmune disease. A healthy political party is a coalition, a collection of ideas and interests that negotiate and compromise. A personality cult is a monolith, where all ideas are subordinate to the leader's whims. In a personality cult, there is no policy, only decrees. There is no succession plan, only dynasty. There is no accountability, only loyalty tests. And because there's no independent institutional strength, no ideological foundation separate from the leader, the entire structure is only as strong as the leader's popularity. When that popularity dips, when the leader becomes a ratings loser instead of a ratings winner, the structure starts to wobble violently. Politicians who yoked their entire careers to this wagon start looking around nervously. Donors who only care about winning start closing their checkbooks. Operatives who know how to read polls start updating their resumes. The insider flip is both a symptom of this decay and an accelerant. It shows that even those closest to the throne are calculating that the king's reign is entering its twilight. The legal implications of this flip are staggering to contemplate. A cooperating witness from the inner circle is the holy grail for prosecutors. They can provide context and narrative that turns a pile of documents into a compelling story of criminality. They can authenticate evidence, explain coded language in emails, provide the backstory to suspicious financial transactions. They can testify about what was said in the room, about the intent behind the actions, about the consciousness of guilt that becomes so evident when the boss demands loyalty oaths and destroys evidence. A single cooperator with detailed knowledge can be the stone that starts an avalanche. Prosecutors can use that testimony to pressure other players, to show them that the ship is sinking, and the only life raft is cooperation. Indictments that once seemed speculative suddenly become concrete possibilities. The cooperator can lead investigators to evidence they didn't know existed, to witnesses they hadn't identified, to crimes they hadn't even imagined. This isn't just one person telling some stories. This is a skeleton key that can unlock an entire dungeon of legal horrors. The controversial decisions that have been piling up, the use of the pardon power in ways that reek of obstruction and reward for criminal allies, the opaque settlement of a staggering financial obligation that looks less like justice and more like a payoff, the stubborn refusal to release information that could clear the air but might also incriminate, create a toxic atmosphere where even the most dedicated defenders start to choke. Each of these decisions has a constituency that it alienates. Each one creates a new fracture line. The base that demanded transparency on certain files is getting stonewalled, and the cognitive dissonance required to defend that is exhausting. The operatives who wanted to run on law and order are now defending pardons that look like lawlessness. The donors who were promised a competent operation are watching a three-ring circus of corruption and infighting. The cumulative effect is a slow bleed of support, a gradual erosion of the foundation that the entire empire rests upon. The insider flip is the loudest crack yet, but it's not the only one. Looking ahead from this explosive moment requires a clear-eyed assessment of the rubble and what might grow from it. The first and most immediate consequence is that the template has been forged. Others will follow. The social and psychological barrier to flipping has been breached. The first one to jump is always the traitor, the Judas, the rat. The second one is just following a trend. The fifth one is practically expected. Once the ice is broken, the water rushes through. Every person in the inner circle is now looking at the cooperator and silently asking, what did they get? What kind of deal? Are they going to walk away clean while I'm facing ruin? That comparison game is the engine of cascading defections. The floodgates don't open all at once. They crack, then they groan. Then they burst, and suddenly, the whole valley is underwater. The second consequence is the irrevocable damage to the command and control structure of the remaining loyalists. The boss relies on fear and loyalty to keep people in line. But this flip demonstrates that fear can be overcome, and that loyalty is a one-way street to a dead end. The remaining staff and allies will become less reliable, not more. They'll be hedging their bets, protecting themselves, communicating through lawyers, immunizing their own positions. The boss will sense this disloyalty, which will make him more paranoid and more abusive, which will in turn accelerate the desire of everyone else to flee. It's a feedback loop of destruction. The third consequence is that the political messaging war has just been handed a nuclear weapon on a silver platter. Opponents will seize on this flip with relentless surgical precision. The message writes itself. Even his own inner circle, the people who saw everything up close, who knew him best, decided he was too dangerous, too corrupt, too toxic to support. The people who were in the room are now running out of the room and straight to the authorities. This isn't a partisan attack from Democrats. It's a verdict from the defendant's own chosen family. That message will dominate television screens, social media feeds, and campaign mailers. It's devastatingly simple to understand and nearly impossible to refute without sounding like you're defending corruption. The fourth consequence is that Trump's legal jeopardy has just metastasized into something far more lethal. Whatever this insider knows, whatever they're providing, it's enough to send a man who has survived 100 political deaths into a reported rage spiral. That's not a reaction to nothing. That's the reaction of someone who knows the cooperator has the goods. The information is likely concrete, specific, and corroborated by some form of physical or documentary evidence. The insider may have been wearing a wire. They almost certainly have been copying emails and messages. They're going to lead prosecutors to the bodies. And in the coming weeks and months, as the fruits of this cooperation become visible in the form of new indictments, new search warrants, new superseding charges, the full magnitude of this betrayal will become apparent. To track what happens next like a professional, you have to watch for the signals hidden in the noise. The first signal is identification. When the name of the flipped insider becomes public, the world will instantly understand the scale of the damage. If it's someone with access to the inner sanctum of legal strategy, that's bad. If it's someone who handled finances, that's catastrophic. If it's someone who was in the room for conversations about pardons and obstruction and witness pressure, that's a legal earthquake. The second signal is the cascade. Watch for a second, a third, a fifth member of the inner circle to suddenly start behaving strangely, hiring new criminal defense attorneys, being conspicuously absent from public events, issuing statements that are just a little too generic and non-committal. A single flip is a story. Multiple flips is a funeral. The third signal is the boss's reaction. If he's raging, purging, demanding loyalty oaths, and attacking the cooperator's character with a ferocity that seems disproportionate, he's terrified. If he's unusually quiet, he's strategizing. Either way, the panic is measurable. The fourth signal is prosecutorial action. Watch the dockets, new filings, new motions, new sealed indictments. Prosecutors don't sit on a cooperating witness. They use the momentum. They ride the wave. An insider flip gives them a burst of energy and evidence, and they'll move to capitalize. before the targets have time to coordinate their counter-moves. The fifth signal is the political response from elected Republicans. The reflexive defenders will double down, attacking the cooperators' credibility and wrapping themselves even more tightly in the flag of loyalty. But the more calculating politicians, the ones who want to survive a post-Trump world, will go conspicuously quiet. They'll offer tepid statements about letting the legal process play out. They'll distance themselves with silence rather than words. When the noise from the defenders starts to sound shrill and isolated, you'll know the political winds have truly shifted. We stand at a precipice, a genuine inflection point in a political saga that has felt endless. The flipping of a top insider under the crushing weight of legal, political, and personal pressure is more than a dramatic headline. It is a structural failure in the architecture of an empire built on intimidation. It demonstrates that the cost of loyalty has become too high for even the most committed soldiers to bear. It shows that the promises of protection from the top are empty, that the legal walls are closing in from all sides, and that the instinct for self-preservation, one of the most powerful forces in human nature, has overcome the artificial bonds of a one-sided fealty. The unraveling will not happen overnight, but the thread has been pulled and the entire garment is beginning to come apart. In the coming weeks, the dominoes will either steady themselves or they will continue to fall with a speed and fury that remakes the entire landscape. Right now, the sound everyone is hearing is not the silence of a stable operation, it's the terrifying music of things falling apart.